The temperature dropped to -30 degrees in less than 24 hours. Nebraska farmer James Wilkins looked out his window on January 12, 2019, watching as ice crystals formed across the vast landscape of his 300-acre farm. What started as light flurries had transformed into one of the most devastating winter storms to hit the Midwest in decades. The National Weather Service had issued warnings, but nobody expected the storm would cut power to over 100,000 homes and strand entire communities for weeks. "I've lived here my whole life, 52 years on this same land," James would later tell reporters, "but I'd never seen anything like it. The ice wasn't just falling, it was building, each layer thicker than the last, until power lines snapped like twigs." As darkness fell that first night, the howling wind carried the distant sounds of animals in distress. Beyond James's property lay 3 neighboring farms, a wildlife sanctuary, and countless wild animals trapped in the freezing conditions. What nobody realized yet was that all their lives would soon depend on one man and his 30-year-old John Deere tractor, a machine James had nearly sold the previous summer. The power went out at 11:42 p.m. With it, every electric heating system, water pump, and life-sustaining mechanism across miles of farmland went silent. In sub-zero temperatures, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a death sentence for thousands of vulnerable animals. James's wife, Sarah, woke him at 3 a.m., her voice trembling. "The generators failed," she whispered. "The barn temperature is dropping fast." In their own barn, 60 dairy cows, 15 horses, and dozens of smaller animals would freeze to death by morning without heat. But what James discovered in those pre-dawn hours would force him to make decisions that would test the limits of human endurance and compassion. This is the true story of how one farmer's ingenuity and determination turned a 30-year-old tractor into a lifeline, and how a rural community united against impossible odds to save hundreds of animals from certain death. If you're watching this right now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if you've ever experienced an extreme winter storm. And make sure you're subscribed. This incredible true story is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The first thing James did was reach for his phone. No signal. Ice had taken down the cell towers too. He pulled on 4 layers of clothing, heavy boots, and stepped into the frozen world outside. The thermometer read -32 degrees, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. His breath crystallized instantly in front of his face as he trudged through knee-deep snow toward the barn. What he saw inside stopped him cold. The animals were already huddled together, their body heat the only thing keeping them alive. But it wouldn't be enough. Without intervention, they'd be dead within hours. James had exactly 2 gallons of gasoline for his small emergency generator, not nearly enough. His mind raced through possibilities until his eyes fell on the old John Deere 6030 tractor parked in the equipment shed, the same tractor his grandfather had purchased in 1989, the same tractor James had almost sold 6 months earlier when newer models promised better efficiency. Sarah found him in the shed, hands already black, with grease despite the cold, working frantically by flashlight. "What are you doing?" she asked, her words visible in the freezing air. "The PTO shaft," James replied without looking up. "If I can connect it to a generator, the tractor engine can produce electricity." It was a desperate plan. The power takeoff PTO shaft of the tractor could, theoretically, be connected to a generator to produce electricity. But James had never done it before. Nobody in the county had. It would require precision engineering in brutal conditions, with tools frozen stiff and fingers that could barely move. As dawn broke across the frozen Nebraska landscape, neighbors began to arrive on foot. The first was Bill Henderson from 2 miles east, then the Parkers from the south property. Each carried the same desperate message. Their animals were dying, and they needed help. What happened over the next 72 hours would become local legend, a testament to human ingenuity, community, spirit, and the unexpected hero that emerged in the form of a 30-year-old green and yellow tractor. James Wilkins wasn't the type of man who made headlines. At 52, his weathered hands and sun-creased face told the story of a life spent working the land his great-grandfather had homesteaded in 1887. A third-generation farmer, James had weathered droughts, floods, and economic downturns that had forced many neighboring farms into bankruptcy. But his steady, methodical approach to problems had always seen him through. "My dad always said there are 2 kinds of farmers," James would later explain. "Those who quit when things break, and those who figure out how to fix them. He made sure I was the second kind. This mindset had served him well through decades of farming challenges. James had developed a reputation in Knox County as the man who could fix almost anything mechanical. Neighbors regularly brought broken equipment to his workshop, where James would troubleshoot problems others had deemed hopeless. His connection to the John Deere 6030 tractor was deeply personal. His grandfather had purchased it new in 1989, spending nearly every penny of that year's harvest on what was then cutting-edge technology. James had learned to drive on that tractor as a boy, and later it had helped him expand the farm during the prosperous years of the early 2000s. But farming had changed. Modern agriculture demanded newer equipment with computer, diagnostics and GPS-guided systems. The previous summer, equipment salesmen had visited multiple times, pitching new tractors with impressive features. They'd offered a modest trade-in value for the old 6030, pointing out its outdated hydraulics and lack of modern amenities. "You're leaving money on the table keeping this dinosaur running," one salesman had told him. Sarah had advocated for the upgrade. Their daughter Emily, studying agricultural science at the University of Nebraska, had sent research papers on efficiency gains with newer equipment. The decision seemed logical, and James had nearly signed the papers in August. What stopped him wasn't practicality, but sentiment. The weekend before the scheduled trade-in, James had found his 8-year-old grandson, Michael, sitting in the tractor's cab, pretending to drive across imaginary fields. "This was great-grandpa's, right?" the boy had asked. "Sure was," James replied. "And my dad's after that, then mine." "Will it be mine someday?" Michael asked. The question had given James pause. That night he'd called the dealership and cancelled the trade-in. The salesman was baffled, but James couldn't articulate his reasons beyond saying he'd decided to stick with what works. Sarah had been disappointed but understood. Some decisions on a family farm transcended pure economics. That choice, made for entirely sentimental reasons, would now be tested in ways James could never have imagined as he worked feverishly in the frozen equipment shed. The tractor's 466 cubic-inch turbo diesel engine was designed to pull plows through heavy soil, not generate electricity. But James understood its fundamental mechanics. The engine created rotational energy transferred through the power takeoff (PTO) shaft to run implements like balers and mowers. In theory, this same principle could power a generator if he could make the connection work. What made the old tractor uniquely suited for this emergency was its mechanical simplicity. Unlike modern tractors with electronic control modules that would fail in extreme cold, the 6030 was purely mechanical. It had been built in an era when farmers needed to repair their own equipment in the field. Every system was accessible, understandable, and, most importantly, modifiable. As James worked, neighbors gathered in the shed, bringing what tools and parts they could carry through the snow. Bill Henderson, a retired mechanic, recognized what James was attempting. "You're building a power station," he said, not as a question but with dawning realization. "Trying to," James replied, his hands trembling with cold as he worked. "If I can get the RPMs consistent and find a way to regulate the output voltage." Henderson nodded and picked up a wrench. "Tell me what you need." Outside, the storm intensified. Roads were impassable as ice accumulated 3 inches thick on every surface. Emergency services had announced they couldn't respond to calls until conditions improved, which could take days. Throughout the county, temperatures inside homes and barns were plummeting. What nobody knew yet was that this improvised solution would not only save James's animals, but become the last hope for every living creature within miles. By mid-morning on January 13th, the equipment shed had transformed into an impromptu engineering workshop. Word had spread through the community, and those who could safely make the journey arrived on foot, snowmobiles or even cross-country skis. They brought tools, spare parts, and the desperate hope that James's idea might work. The challenge was formidable. A tractor's PTO shaft spins at either 540 or 1000 RPM, revolutions per minute, designed to power mechanical farm implements, not produce electricity. To convert this mechanical energy into usable power required precise calibration. The biggest problem is maintaining consistent RPMs. James explained to the gathered farmers and neighbors. If the engine speed fluctuates, we'll get power surges that could damage anything we connect. The solution began to take shape through collaborative problem-solving. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a veterinarian who'd been stranded while making farm calls, recognized an old 50-kilowatt three-phase generator in the corner of James's shed. "That generator's designed to be driven by a belt, not a PTO," she observed, "which is why we need to build." "An adapter," James replied, "and a governor system to maintain consistent RPMs." What followed was a masterclass in rural innovation. Using metal parts salvaged from broken farm equipment, the team fabricated a custom adapter to connect the tractor's PTO shaft to the generator's drive pulley. Bill Henderson modified an old mechanical governor from an irrigation pump to help regulate the tractor's engine speed. By noon, they were ready for the first test. The temperature had dropped to negative 35 degrees, with wind chill making it feel even colder. Everyone held their breath as James climbed into the tractor cab, his fingers so numb he could barely turn the key. The 30-year-old diesel engine roared to life, belching black smoke that dissipated in the frigid air. James engaged the PTO, and the improvised connection began to turn the generator. Lights flickered, dimmed, then steadied as Henderson adjusted the governor. A cheer erupted from the frozen onlookers. They had power, enough to run heaters, water pumps, and essential equipment across multiple farms. The ingenuity of rural America, forged through generations of self-reliance, had created a lifeline. If you're still with us, I'd love to know what you think of this incredible story so far. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to get creative during an emergency. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. The most dramatic part of this rescue mission is coming up next. What made James's solution particularly brilliant was its mobility. Unlike a stationary generator, the tractor could be driven to different locations. James and his neighbors quickly developed a rotation schedule, moving the tractor generator between farms to provide periodic power where it was most critically needed. The first priority was the dairy operations. Without milking machines, dairy cows would suffer painful mastitis within days. James drove the tractor through snowdrifts to the Parker farm, where 120 Holsteins needed immediate relief. "We had been hand-milking for 18 hours straight," Lisa Parker would later tell local reporters. "When we saw that green tractor coming through the snow, it was like seeing the cavalry arrive." For 6 hours, the tractor powered the Parkers' milking parlor while also running heaters to prevent pipes from freezing. Once finished, James drove to the Henderson property, where a heated barn housed rescue horses and dozens of sheep. The work was grueling. Each connection required careful setup to prevent power surges. The tractor needed refueling every 4 hours from the limited diesel reserves each farm had stored, and James could only catch moments of sleep in the tractor cab between locations. News of the mobile power station spread through emergency radio channels. By the end of the first day, the County Emergency Management Office had established a coordinated schedule, prioritizing locations based on need. The wildlife sanctuary 8 miles north housed injured raptors, deer, and other wild animals who couldn't survive the extreme cold. Their backup generator had failed within hours of the power outage. When Sanctuary Director Karen Williams made contact via ham radio, her voice broke with emotion. "We've lost 5 animals already," she reported. "The rest won't make it through another night." James checked his fuel gauge and the darkening sky. The journey would be treacherous, with roads invisible under snow and ice, but the decision was immediate. "I'll be there in 3 hours," he promised. "Keep them together for warmth until then." As he prepared for the dangerous journey, nobody yet knew that the storm was just beginning, or that the tractor's engine would soon need to run continuously for days, pushing the old machine far beyond what its designers had ever intended. The digital thermometer in James's kitchen had stopped working at negative 40 degrees, the lowest reading it could display. Outside, temperatures continued to plummet as the polar vortex settled over the Midwest with unprecedented intensity. Weather experts would later confirm that parts of Nebraska experienced wind chills approaching negative 65 degrees that night, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under 2 minutes. The journey to the wildlife sanctuary became a nightmare of navigation through a featureless white landscape. James had traveled these roads his entire life, but now every landmark was buried under snow and ice. He relied on instinct and memory, driving the tractor at walking speed with a powerful spotlight, illuminating just a few feet ahead. "I knew if I went off the road, that would be it," James later recalled. "Not just for me, but for every animal depending on this tractor." The trip took nearly 5 hours. When James finally arrived at the wildlife sanctuary, he found a scene of Desperate measures. Staff and volunteers had crowded dozens of animals into a single room, using their own body heat and candles to provide minimal warmth. Injured eagles, usually kept in separate enclosures, were housed alongside fawns, raccoons, and a young black bear recovering from surgery. "We've been losing one animal every hour," Director Williams explained as they worked to connect the generator. "The most vulnerable ones first." The tractor's engine had been running continuously for nearly 20 hours by this point. Under normal farming operations, such extended use would be interrupted by regular maintenance checks, but there was no time for that luxury now. As James monitored the engine temperature and oil pressure gauges, he noticed concerning fluctuations. "She's running hot even in this cold," he told Dr. Rodriguez, who had accompanied him to treat animals at the sanctuary. "The prolonged high RPMs are taking a toll." Once power was established at the sanctuary, James made a difficult decision. The tractor needed maintenance or it would fail completely. He would have to shut it down temporarily, meaning no power for at least an hour while he performed essential checks. This created an agonizing dilemma for the sanctuary staff. Which animals would have heat, and which would have to endure another hour of deadly cold? The decisions were made based on veterinary assessments, with the most critical cases kept in the Chi-powered area. Working by flashlight in temperatures that froze metal tools to bare skin, James changed the oil, replaced the fuel filter, and checked the increasingly brittle belts and hoses. His fingers bled from cuts he couldn't feel due to numbness, but the work continued without pause. What James discovered during this maintenance was deeply concerning. The engine was showing signs of stress never intended by its designers. Small cracks were appearing in non-critical components. The continuous operation was pushing the machine to its structural limits. "How long can it keep running like this?" Williams asked as they prepared to restart the tractor. James wiped frozen oil from his hands. "Honestly, I don't know. These tractors are built to last, but not like this. We're asking it to do something it was never designed for." When the engine roared back to life, everyone breathed a momentary sigh of relief, but James knew they were operating on borrowed time. The storm showed no signs of abating, with forecasts now predicting another 48 hours of extreme conditions before road crews could begin clearing major routes. As dawn broke on January 14th, the second full day of the crisis, James received dire news via emergency radio. The county's emergency diesel reserves were critically low. Each farm and operation had started with their own supply, but consumption was far outpacing normal usage patterns due to continuous operation. Mathematical. Reality was unavoidable. Without additional fuel, the tractor would run dry within 36 hours. After that, there would be no way to generate power until roads were cleared and supply chains restored, potentially days later. County emergency services made a bold decision. A National Guard helicopter would attempt to deliver emergency fuel supplies despite dangerous flying conditions. The plan called for precise coordinates and a large open space for delivery. As James drove the tractor back toward his farm where the delivery would be attempted, he monitored every abnormal sound and vibration from the engine. The old machine had become more than equipment. It was now the difference between life and death for hundreds of animals, and increasingly for people too, as home heating systems failed throughout the region. What nobody anticipated was how the local news would soon learn of the story, turning one farmer's improvised solution into a symbol of rural resilience that would capture national attention. By the third day of the crisis, the story of James Wilkins and his life-saving tractor had reached Lincoln, Nebraska. A ham radio operator had relayed the details to his cousin, a producer at Cole NTV, who immediately recognized the human interest potential. Though road conditions prevented news crews from reaching Knox County, the station broadcast the story using phoned-in details and archive footage of previous storms. Within hours, the narrative spread to national outlets. The image of a farmer using decades-old equipment to save countless animals resonated across America. Social media erupted with the hashtag #TractorHero, and offers of help poured in from across the country. The National Guard helicopter mission became even more critical as public attention focused on the unfolding crisis. Despite aviation experts advising against flight in such extreme conditions, a crew volunteered for the dangerous fuel delivery mission. The spotlight actually helped, Emergency Management Director Tom Brewer would later explain. Once this became a national story, resources that might have been tied up in bureaucracy suddenly became available. The helicopter mission was scheduled for noon on January 15th, when a brief break in the storm was predicted. James and neighbors cleared a landing zone in his largest field, using tractor paths to create a visible X in the snow visible from the air. Meanwhile, the community had transformed around the tractor's operation. A precise schedule had been established, with the machine providing power to different locations on a rotating basis. 4 hours at the dairy farms, 3 at the wildlife sanctuary, and so on. Between movements, James or another trained operator would perform quick maintenance checks. What made this rotation work was the extraordinary cooperation between neighbors who, under normal circumstances, might have limited interaction. Farmers who had previously competed at county fairs now worked side by side, sharing resources and expertise. Lisa Parker, who had initially received help for her dairy operation, now coordinated animal care across multiple farms, allowing others to focus on mechanical and logistical challenges. Dr. Rodriguez established a mobile veterinary triage system, prioritizing animals most at risk and developing creative solutions for those that couldn't be saved by conventional means. "We wrapped newborn calves in survival blankets designed for human hypothermia," she explained. "We used techniques developed for Arctic expeditions to prevent frostbite in sensitive animals." The community's children played crucial roles too. Teenagers formed relay teams to carry messages between farms when radio batteries failed. Younger children sorted supplies and prepared hot beverages for workers. Emily Wilkins, James's daughter, had managed to reach home from university just before roads closed completely, and now used her agricultural science knowledge to calculate precise feed requirements for weakened livestock. As noon approached on January 15th, the tractor was positioned at the center of the landing zone. Its engine, which had now been running almost continuously for 72 hours, had developed a concerning knock. James monitored it constantly, making minute adjustments to keep it operational. The sound of the approaching helicopter was nearly obscured by the howling wind. Visibility remained poor, with blowing snow reducing sightlines to less than a quarter mile. The pilot would later describe the mission as flying by instruments and prayer. The Black Hawk helicopter appeared suddenly through the white haze, hovering 30 feet above the designated landing zone. Rather than attempting a full landing in the dangerous conditions, the crew lowered the fuel drums on cables while maintaining position with expert precision. Ground crews, including James and a dozen neighbors, rushed to secure the fuel before it could be affected by the extreme cold. 5 55-gallon drums of diesel fuel, enough to keep the tractor running for another week if necessary. As they worked to transfer the first drum into the tractor's tank, James noticed something alarming. The engine's knock had worsened significantly, and dark smoke occasionally puffed from the exhaust stack. Decades of farming experience told him what was happening. Internal engine components were beginning to fail. "How much longer can it run?" Bill Henderson asked, recognizing the symptoms himself. James wiped ice from his beard. "Maybe 24 hours, maybe less." The realization was devastating. Even with the new fuel supply, the tractor itself was wearing out. The mechanical heart of their survival operation was beginning to fail, and without it, they would lose the ability to generate power before outside help could reach them. As the helicopter departed, James gathered the community leaders in his kitchen, warmed briefly by the tractor-powered generator. They needed a new plan, one that would require even more ingenuity and an even greater risk. The mechanical death throes of the John Deere tractor began at 3:17 a.m. on January 16th. James had been dozing in a chair beside the machine, monitoring its increasingly erratic performance, when a sharp, metallic clang jolted him awake. Black smoke billowed from the exhaust stack, and the engine's steady rumble devolved into a sputtering, uneven rhythm. "Everyone up!" James shouted to the volunteers resting nearby. "We're losing her!" The scene that followed would be described by one witness as open-heart surgery on a machine. With the generator disconnected, James and Henderson removed the tractor's side panels, exposing the engine block to the biting cold. Working by lantern light, they identified the issue: a cracked cylinder head, allowing coolant to leak into the combustion chamber. Under normal circumstances, this diagnosis would mean the end. The tractor would be towed to a shop, the engine rebuilt over several weeks. But these were not normal circumstances. "We can run it without that cylinder," Henderson suggested, his face illuminated by the portable light. "Disable the fuel injector for cylinder 4, remove the push rods, and she'll run on 5 cylinders instead of 6. It was a desperate measure that would further reduce the tractor's power output and efficiency, but it might keep it running. As dawn approached, James made the difficult decision to attempt the modification. Word spread quickly among the scattered farms that the tractor, now viewed with almost human characteristics by many, was failing. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. This machine had become more than equipment. It represented hope in physical form. Linda Watson, who operated a small goat farm 2 miles away, later described the community's reaction. It was like hearing a loved one had gone into critical condition. We'd been surviving on the rotation schedule, knowing our turn for power would come. The thought of losing that lifeline was terrifying. As James and Henderson worked frantically on the engine modification, county officials delivered more concerning news via emergency radio. The weather system had stalled, and clearing operations for major roads were now delayed by at least 3 more days. The specialized equipment needed to cut through ice-covered roads couldn't reach the area until temperatures rose slightly. This timeline created an impossible situation. Even with the cylinder modification, engineering estimates suggested the tractor couldn't run more than another 36 hours. The machine that had saved so many lives would fail before outside help arrived. By mid-morning, James had completed the modification. The tractor started reluctantly, running with a pronounced imbalance that vibrated the entire frame. Its power output had decreased by nearly 25%, meaning the generator produced less electricity, forcing even more difficult decisions about which critical systems could receive power. "We need to consolidate," James announced to the community leaders gathered in his barn. "We can't keep moving between locations. We need to bring the animals together where possible and centralize our efforts." The plan they developed was unprecedented in the community's history. The Wilkins' largest barn would become a makeshift ark, housing animals from multiple farms in a single location where the failing tractor could provide consistent power without needing to move. Implementing this plan meant dangerous journeys through sub-zero temperatures, transporting vulnerable animals across miles of frozen landscape. Farmers constructed improvised sleds to move smaller animals. For larger livestock, the difficult decision was made to attempt walking them through the snow, despite the risks of frostbite to exposed udders and extremities. Dr. Rodriguez prepared by creating a triage system in the central barn, designating areas for different species and medical needs. "We're going against every veterinary best practice regarding separation and stress," she acknowledged, "but extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary measures." As preparations continued, James noticed a young man documenting the process with a smartphone. Charlie Weber, a local community college student, had been charging the device during power rotations and recording key moments of the crisis. "People need to see this," Weber explained when James questioned him. "What's happening here? It matters." James nodded slowly, returning his attention to the tractor's gauges. The temperature was running dangerously high despite the extreme cold. Oil pressure fluctuated unpredictably. The modified engine would not last long. By evening, the first animals began arriving at the central location. Goats wrapped in blankets, calves on sleds pulled by exhausted farmers, and caged chickens carried inside coats for warmth. The massive consolidation operation had begun, all dependent on a failing tractor that sputtered and smoked, while continuing to turn the generator that produced their only power. What no one could anticipate was how this crisis would end, not through the heroic efforts already underway, but through an unexpected intervention that would reunite James with a piece of his past he thought he'd never see again. As January 17th dawned, the temperature finally rose above zero for the first time in 5 days. The modified tractor engine had run for 109 consecutive hours, an engineering feat that would later be studied in agricultural mechanics courses across the Midwest. But its condition was deteriorating rapidly, with metal fatigue and bearing failure now inevitable. Inside the Wilkins barn, now housing an improbable menagerie of farm animals, pets, and wildlife, the community had settled into a rhythm of cooperative care. Species that would normally never interact shared space in carefully managed arrangements. Dairy cows stood alongside horses. Goats mingled with sheep. Even the black bear from the wildlife sanctuary occupied a reinforced stall, sedated and monitored by Dr. Rodriguez. The tractor provided just enough electricity to maintain minimum heat and run essential equipment like milking machines and medical devices. Every kilowatt was precious, allocated through a committee decision process that sometimes required heart-wrenching choices. James barely left the tractor's side, making constant adjustments to coax additional hours from the failing engine. His hands were raw from exposure and mechanical work, his face gaunt from minimal sleep and food. Still, he maintained the machine with single-minded dedication. Shortly after noon, the sound everyone dreaded finally came. A loud mechanical clank followed by a shower of sparks from the engine block. The tractor shuddered violently, then fell silent as white smoke poured from multiple points. "That's it," Henderson said quietly. "She's done." The generator's whine wound down as the last electricity flowed through the cables. Emergency lights flickered and died. The heating system fell silent. In the sudden quiet, the collective breath of dozens of people formed a cloud in the rapidly cooling air. James placed his hand on the tractor's hood, still warm, but cooling quickly. "Thank you, old friend," he whispered. The community faced a stark reality. Without power, temperatures in the barn would plummet below freezing within hours. The animals, already stressed and vulnerable, would begin dying by nightfall. After all their efforts, they had reached what appeared to be the end. County Emergency Services delivered one final update. Road clearing operations had begun on the main highway, but side roads leading to their location remained impassable. Help was coming, but not soon enough. As the community gathered to discuss their dwindling options, a distant sound caught James's attention, the distinctive rumble of diesel engines different from the helicopters they'd heard previously. He stepped outside, scanning the white horizon. 3 massive shapes emerged through the haze of blowing snow, moving slowly but deliberately across the landscape. Bulldozers equipped with specialized ice-cutting blades, followed by utility trucks with the Nebraska Public Power District logo. The lead bulldozer stopped at the property edge, and its door opened. The figure who emerged, bundled against the cold but unmistakable to James, was his son Michael, a power company engineer who had been working in Colorado when the storm hit. The reunion between father and son was brief, emotional, and captured by Charlie Weber's nearly dead smartphone, a moment that would later be shared millions of times on social media. "I saw the news reports," Michael explained as utility workers rushed to establish a temporary power station. "I called every contact I had, pulled every string. These machines were being used for avalanche control in Colorado. I convinced them we needed them more." Within 2 hours, power had been restored to the Wilkins farm and neighboring properties. As heating systems revived and lights flickered on, the atmosphere transformed from desperation to cautious relief. No animals had been lost in the final hours. Against impossible odds, the community had held on just long enough. In the days that followed, as roads gradually reopened and normal operations resumed, national media descended on Knox County. James found himself an unwilling celebrity, uncomfortable with attention, but recognized by strangers in town. His story appeared on morning shows and news magazines, always focused on the tractor that had saved hundreds of lives. John Deere representatives arrived 2 weeks later, asking to examine the now silent machine. Their engineering team marveled at the modifications and adaptations that had pushed the tractor far beyond its design specifications. "Most modern tractors couldn't have done what this one did," their lead engineer admitted. "The computerized systems would have shut down to prevent damage. Sometimes the old ways have advantages we've forgotten." The company made an unexpected offer. They would restore the tractor completely at their factory, at no cost, and return it to the Wilkins farm as a gesture of appreciation for showcasing the durability of their equipment. The restored tractor now occupies a place of honor in a special shed on the Wilkins property. Though fully operational, it's rarely used for farming anymore. Instead, it serves as a monument and teaching tool. School groups visit regularly to learn about the crisis and the engineering principles that made survival possible. James still farms the same land, but with new equipment. The old John Deere, however, remains his most prized possession, a symbol of innovation, community, and resilience in the face of natural disaster. As James told a documentary crew on the 1-year anniversary of the storm, "That tractor taught us something important. The things we build, the things we maintain and care for, they're not just tools. They become part of our story, and sometimes they write the most important chapters." Today, emergency management protocols across the Midwest include what's now called the Wilkins Protocol, identifying vintage agricultural equipment that can be adapted for emergency power generation during extreme weather events. Engineers study the modifications James and his neighbors made, refining and improving the techniques for future use. The crisis changed the community in other lasting ways. Annual preparedness drills now include livestock evacuation plans. Farms maintain cooperative emergency agreements. Children learn basic mechanical and emergency veterinary skills alongside traditional education. But perhaps the most significant legacy is intangible, a renewed appreciation for the ingenuity, determination, and cooperation that define rural America at its best. As the old tractor demonstrated in those desperate days, sometimes the most valuable solutions aren't the newest or most sophisticated, but the ones built to last through whatever challenges arise.